Because, you know, I watched the Republican debate, and I saw this guy, Ron Paul, who has no chance of winning it, and therefore he was very honest, and he's my new hero. I used to think he was RuPaul. And then we had him on our show a few weeks ago, and I realized he's a completely different person. And he spoke real truth about the war on terror, about 9/11, about Iraq. He said, you know what? They hate us because we're over there. They don't hate us because of our freedom or any of those stupid slogans that the Bush people put out. And I'm just wondering why a Democrat isn't saying things like that.
Congressman Paul, you voted against the war. Why are all your fellow Republicans up here wrong?
That's a very good question, and you might ask the question, why are 70% of the American people now wanting us out of there, and why did the Republicans do so poorly last year? So I would suggest that we should look at foreign policy. I'm suggesting very strongly that we should have a foreign policy of non-intervention, the traditional American foreign policy and a Republican foreign policy. Throughout the 20th century, the Republican Party benefited from a non-interventionist foreign policy. Think of how Eisenhower came in to stop the Korean War. Think of how Nixon was elected to stop the mess in Vietnam. How did we win the election in the year 2000? We talked about a humble foreign policy, no nation building, don't police the world. That is a conservative, it's a Republican, it's a pro-American, it follows the Founding Fathers, and besides, it follows the Constitution. I tried very hard to solve this problem before we went to war by saying, declare war if you want to go to war, fight it and win it, but don't get into it for political reasons or to enforce UN resolutions or pretend the Iraqis were a national threat to us.
It's time.
Congressman Paul, I believe you are the only man on the stage who opposes the war in Iraq, who would bring the troops home as quickly as almost immediately, sir. Are you out of step with your party? Is your party out of step with the rest of the world? If either of those is the case, why are you seeking its nomination?
Well, I think the party has lost its way because the conservative wing of the Republican Party always advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. Senator Robert Taft didn't want to be in NATO. George Bush won the election in year 2000 campaigning on a humble foreign policy, no nation building, no policing of the world. Republicans were elected to end the Korean War. The Republicans were elected to end the Vietnam War. There's a strong tradition of being anti-war in the Republican Party. It is the constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy. Stay out of entangling alliances. Be friends with countries. Negotiate and talk with them and trade with them. Just think of the tremendous improvement relationships with Vietnam. We lost 60,000 men. We came home in defeat. Now we go over there and invest in Vietnam. So there's a lot of merit to the advice of the founders and following the Constitution. And my argument is that we shouldn't go to war so carelessly. When we do, the wars don't end.
Congressman, you don't think that changed with the 9/11 attack, sir?
What changed?
The non-interventionist policies.
No, non-intervention was a major contributing factor. Have you ever read about the reasons they attacked us? They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. So right now we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attack, sir?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier. They have already now, since that time, have killed 3,400 of our men, and I don't think it was necessary.
Wendell, may I make a comment on that? That's really an extraordinary statement. It's an extraordinary statement as someone who lived through the attack of September 11, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11. I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
No, wait a second. Let's all get 30 seconds.
They are coming.
We all want 30 seconds to talk about this.
Wendell, go ahead.
The question that kept coming up for you was that you are not saying the same things the other Republican candidates are saying. You seem to be not in sync with what the party itself is saying. Why run as a Republican? And if you don't get the nomination, would you run as an independent?
Well, the majority of the American people don't like the war. And I want to be president of the country, not president of the Republican Party.
But you got to get the nomination first.
Yeah, but the party itself has to have a position that's attractive to the entire country. We lost last year's election on the war issue. Most people believe that to be the case.
But if you didn't get the nomination, would you run as an independent?
No. No,
you would not?
No, I'm not planning on that. No, I don't intend to do that. Pressure.
I want to go back to this exchange you had with Mayor Giuliani here for just a second. Are you suggesting the United States of America caused the attack on 9/11?
No, I think that's a cop-out. When people imply that, what you're saying is that if you don't endorse my foreign policy, you're un-American, you're unpatriotic.
I never said anything like that. I'm not saying. You're suggesting.
No, but I think that was the point in the debate, that if I didn't endorse this foreign policy, you turn it around, or he turned it around.
I'm not saying that, but what specifically then are you saying? Are you suggesting that our policies are causing the hatred of people that would cause them to want to kill us?
I think it contributes significantly to it, and this is exactly what our CIA tells us. And anybody who's done any research on this has found out.
What have we done to cause the attack? What did America do to cause the attack on 9/11?
Okay, the Americans didn't do anything to cause it, but policies over many years caused and elicited hatred toward us, so somebody was willing to commit suicide. For instance, the occupation with our military troops on their holy land in Saudi Arabia, bombing a Muslim country for 10 years, putting on sanctions that killed hundreds of thousands of people. So that caused it anger.
Are you saying then that if the world has no moral obligation in the first Gulf War, when an innocent country is being pillaged and people are being raped and murdered and slaughtered, or in the case of Saddam, he's gassing his own people, are you suggesting we have no moral obligation? No, you stand by and let that immorality happen?
We have on numerous occasions.
You support that?
We have on numerous occasions. If we feel strongly about it, why don't we declare?
If a woman is being raped next door, we just do nothing there either?
We're just out of time, but the fact is the Reagan administration stood by while the Kurds were being gassed. It happened in 1988. We didn't do anything about it for how many years?
What did we do with Moscow? What did we do with the time we stood by and they did it to their people?
We got to run.
You would stand by and do that. I would not. No, I think that's immoral.
Well, would you have the courtesy to ask the Congress to declare war? Would you follow the Constitution?
We did declare war. The authorization. You support a declaration of war. There's no place in the Constitution that says specifically.
We got to run, guys. The Kurds were gassed, and we stood by for years until
we gave them the gas.
We gave them the gas.
We're not responsible for what happened on 9/11.
They're going to keep debating. More on the other side.
Ron Paul coming in with the win on the text message election, at least in the early returns, is almost in line with the attraction that he's caused for the press. It seems that by getting slapped by Rudy Giuliani for his assertion that the U.S. effectively asked for the 9/11 attacks, for bombing Iraq when it was under sanctions, he's going to get a lot of ink. So Ron Paul, quite by the actions of Rudy Giuliani's attack, may be doing quite well. And as for the text messaging, maybe he's a little bit better organized and having his organizers do the necessary dialing for all of that. Mitt Romney coming in a strong second above Rudy Giuliani, and John McCain not yet placing in the early return, suggests that folks have begun to sort of get a grasp for the top tier, with the exception of Ron Paul.
Here's a current look at the results of our text message poll. In first place, Mitt Romney, 27%. In a very close second place, Ron Paul, 26%. In third place, Rudy Giuliani with 18%. And back with us now, former Democratic pollster Pat Goodell and GOPAC Chairman Michael Steele, both our Fox News contributors. Michael, what does it say? That here you have, throughout the night, Ron Paul slipping just 1%, but has been ahead all night. perhaps the most controversial statements of the entire debate, and at variance with everybody else in the Republican field.
Right.
What does it say that he's doing so well in our text messaging among those watching Fox
To
News
be
right
honest,
now?
it says absolutely nothing. It says that he's got a lot of folks out there who's going to text message for him. I think tonight, in my view, there was clear separation between those who should be in this campaign and those who shouldn't.
It's not even phone calls.
He did not,
a phone call,
he did
right?
not win that debate.
He did not win it.
No.
But more importantly, I think what he said is outrageous, and I challenged him on it here because the suggestion here is that
It's our fault.
That our fault.
And that's crazy.
Our foreign policy is costing us $1 trillion, and we can spend most of that or a lot of that money home if we would bring our troops home.
Governor, I just want to also say that Congressman Paul, I've heard him now in many debates talking about bringing our troops home and about the war in Iraq and how it's failed. And I want to tell you that that kind of isolationism, sir, is what caused World War II. Allow him his answer, please. We allowed Hitler to come to power with that kind of attitude of isolationism and appeasement. Okay. And I want to tell you something, sir. I just finished having Thanksgiving with the troops, and their message to you is, the message of these brave men and women who are serving over there is, let us win. Let us win.
We will, please. We will get to Iraq. All right. Let me just remind everyone that these people did take a lot of time to ask these questions, and so we do want direct questions to the answers. We will get to Iraq later, but I do have to allow Congressman Paul 30 seconds to respond.
Absolutely. The real question you have to ask is, why do I get the most money from active duty officers, military personnel? So what John is saying is just totally distorted. He doesn't even understand the difference between non-intervention and isolationism. I'm not an isolationist. I want to trade with people, talk with people, travel, but I don't want to send our troops overseas using force to tell them how to live. We would object to it here, and they're going to object to us over there.
All right, we will have a lot more on Iraq coming up. It's obviously very heated.
We went in there illegally. We did not declare war. It's lasting way too long. We didn't declare war in Korea or Vietnam. The wars were never really ended. We lose those wars. We're losing this one. We shouldn't be there. We ought to just come home because it's... reason, it's in our national self-interest and for our national security. Think of our defenses now, how run down they are. What is the morale of our military today when they're sent over there for 12 months and then they're kept for another 3 months? They come home and less than a year's rest, they're sent back again. Congress is currently trying to change the rules so we give these men an adequate rest. This war is not going well because the foreign policy is defective.
Congressman Hunter?
Yeah, I, of course, opposed the war a long time before it started. The neoconservatives promoted this war many, many years before it was started. Had nothing to do with al-Qaeda. There was no al-Qaeda in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Just think of the weapons the Soviets had in the 60s and the 70s, and we did not have to go to nuclear war with them. There's no reason to go to war against these third world nations. At the same time, those individuals who have predicted these disastrous things to happen if we leave Iraq are the same ones who said as soon as we go in, it will just be duck soup. It'll be over in 3 months. It won't cost us anything because the oil will pay for it.
Has he forgotten about 9/11?
At the same time,
have you forgotten about 9/11?
Just a moment. At the same time, the individuals who predicted the disaster, of course, the domino theory in Vietnam, I was called to duty. I accepted that duty in the 60s. I served 5 years in the military. When we left there, it was tough. Yes, but now we trade with Vietnam. We talk to them. The presidents come to this country. We go back and forth. We invest in that country. We can achieve much more in peace than we can ever achieve in these needless, unconstitutional, undeclared wars.
Senator McCain. What I want to get into it is with a bit from President Bush's second
inaugural address, where he made the spreading of democracy the core of his foreign policy. Here's what he said.
So it is the policy of the United States to seek and support the growth of democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture, with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in our world.
Governor Huckabee, since that speech, there have been free elections in Gaza. They elected Hamas. There have been free elections in Lebanon. They empowered Hezbollah. There have been free elections in Iran. They elected President Ahmadinejad. Has President Bush's policy been a success, and would the spread of democracy be the core of your foreign policy?
Our responsibility is to spread democracy here and make sure that we have it. This is a philosophic and foreign policy problem, because what the president was saying was just a continuation of Woodrow Wilson's making the world safe for democracy. There's nothing wrong with spreading our values around the world, but it is wrong to spread it by force. We should spread it by setting an example and doing a good job here. Threatening Pakistan and threatening Iran makes no sense whatsoever. We went in, and I supported going after the al-Qaeda into Afghanistan, but lo and behold, the neocons took over. They forgot about Osama bin Laden, and what they did, they went into nation building, not only in Afghanistan, they went unjustifiably over into Iraq, and that's why we're in this mess.
Mayor Giuliani.
Congressman Paul, can we go back to the Middle East? You have said the United States should not be trying to broker peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Should the president even be there today, sir?
Well, if you followed my advice, yes, we wouldn't be there. We've been doing that for a good many years, and it hasn't seemed to come to success. No, I think if we weren't there, there'd be more incentives to come to a peaceful agreement. But we support both sides, you know, not only with the Palestinians, but the Lebanese and all the Arab nations. We support Israel, and we try to have this balance. But I think it'd be much better to have a balance by being out of there. And I think there would be a greater incentive for Israel and the Palestinian and all the Arab nations to come together and talk, because I think we get in the way too often of these. And besides, it's costing us a lot of money. It's costing us lives now. And it's time that we come to the point where we believe the world can solve some of their problems without us. And also, we're out of money. We can't do it any longer. We're going bankrupt. And the empires of the world have always ended badly through economic terms. So whether there are peace agreements over there, I mean, for instance, if we would stop all aids over there, we would stop 3 times as much aid as Israel gets to the Arab nations. Why do we arm the Arab nations, and they're the enemies of Israel? But we continue to do that. So why don't we trade with everybody and talk with them? And there's a greater incentive to work these problems out. I think if we'd have been out of there a lot sooner, there may well have been a much different settlement after the Kuwait invasion, because Israel was quite capable of working with moderate Arab nations. They tried to. None of the Arab nations wanted Saddam Hussein in Kuwait. And I think they could have taken care of Saddam Hussein back then and saved all the mess that we have now, because I think there are so many unintended consequences and way too much blowback.
I'm tempted, gentlemen.
Could I just make a comment? I'm not interested in trading with al-Qaeda. All they want to trade is burqas. I don't want to travel with them. They like one-way tickets.
Governor Huckabee,
may I answer that? May I answer that?
Yes, Congressman.
I'm talking exactly about that, because that's what we have been doing. We used to support Saddam Hussein, and we used to be allied with Osama bin Laden. And what I want to do is stop that. Who are our friends one day turn out to be our enemies. Right now, we finally got rid of Saddam Hussein, and what are we doing now? We're rearming the Sunnis, the old henchmen of Saddam Hussein. And what are they going to do with it? All those weapons we're giving the Sunnis in Baghdad. So look out. Believe me, that war is not over. And right now, they're demanding more troops in Afghanistan. And some people, like the senator, he thinks we should be there for 100 years if necessary. How can he commit the young people of this world 5 more generations to be in Iraq if it's necessary? I say it's time to come home.
Senator McCain, you got...
But my final seconds, I'd like to just, with all due respect, Congressman Paul, the issue of whether the president should be in the Middle East comes to something that I think we've got to recognize. We've got one true ally in the Middle East, and that's Israel. It's a tiny nation. I've been there 9 times. I've literally traveled from Dan to Beersheba, and I understand something of that nation and the vulnerability of it. And for us to give the world the impression that we would stand by if it were under attack and simply say it's not our problem would be recklessly irresponsible on our part. And if I were president, you can rest assured that we would not let an ally be annihilated by those enemies which surround it, who have openly stated it is their direct intention to destroy that nation. It would not happen under my presidency.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
In many ways, we treat Israel as a stepchild. We do not give them the responsibility that they deserve. We undermine their national sovereignty. We don't let them design their own peace treaties with their neighbors. And then we turn around and say that when you want to do that or you want to defend your borders, they have to check it out with us. I think Israel would be a lot safer. I made the point earlier. We give 3 times as much money to the Arabs. Why do we arm their enemies? So if you care about Israel, you should be against all the weapons that go to the Arab nations. And I just don't see any purpose in not treating Israel in an adult fashion. I think they'd be a lot better off. I think they one time in the 80s took care of a nuclear reactor in Iraq. I stood up and defended Israel for this. Nobody else did at that time. But we need to recognize they deserve their sovereignty just as we deserve our sovereignty. I believe if they assume more responsibility, there would be more peace there, and that there would be a lot less threat to us. And besides, we don't have any money to do this.
We missed you.
Congressman Paul, yet another question about electability. Do you have any, sir? There's always the question as to whether or not you are in fact viable. Your differences with the Republicans with the rest of the Republicans on this stage has raised questions about whether or not you can actually win the Republican nomination, sir.
Well, we've only had 2 little primaries so far, so it's pretty premature to decide which one is going to be the candidate. But, you know, when you think about it, if you measured everything I've ever said, every vote I've ever taken against the Constitution, you know, I'm a strict constitutionalist. So are you suggesting the Republicans should write me off because I'm a strict constitutionalist? I'm the most conservative member here. I have voted, you know, against more spending and wasting government than anybody else. So you're suggesting that I'm not electable and the Republicans don't want me because I'm a strict fiscal conservative? Because I believe in civil liberties? Why should we not be defending civil liberties? And why should we not be talking about foreign policy that used to be the part of the Republican Party? Mr. Republican Robert Taft didn't even want us to be in NATO. And you're saying now that we have to continue to borrow money from China to finance this empire that we can't afford? Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government, and then we go to war, we lose all these lives promoting democracy in Iraq. I mean, what's going on here? And you're saying that this isn't appealing to Republicans? Where did this come about? I think this is a Republican message. I defend the platform. It used to say we got rid of the Department of Education. It doesn't say that. Now, we as Republicans went and doubled the size of the Department of Education. So where have we gone? I think we've lost our way. And then the insinuation that I am less Republican because of that?
Congressman, thank you very much.
That raises the question, if you were President of the United States, would you need to go to Congress to get authorization to take military action against Iran's nuclear facilities?
You sit down with your attorneys and tell you what you have to do, but obviously the President of the United States has to do what's in the best interest of the United States to protect us against a potential threat.
Gentlemen, it's so important. Congressman Paul, do you believe the President needs authorization of Congress to attack strategic targets in Iran, nuclear facilities?
Absolutely. This idea of going and talking to attorneys totally baffles me. Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it? You're not allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. Now, as far as fleeting enemies go, yes, if there's an imminent attack on us, we've never had that happen in 220 years. The thought that the Iranians could pose an imminent attack on the United States is preposterous. There's no way. This is just just war propaganda, continued war propaganda, preparing this nation to go to war and spread this war not only in Iraq but into Iran unconstitutionally. It is a road to disaster for us as a nation. It's a road to our financial disaster if we don't read the Constitution once in a while.
Around the horn, Congressman.
And the point that I think it was Congressman Paul made before, that we've never had an imminent attack. I don't know where he was on September 11.
That was no country. That was 19 thugs. It had nothing to do with a country.
Congressman Paul, your position on the war is pretty simple. Get out. What about, though, trying to minimize the bloodbath that would certainly occur if we pull out in a hurry? What about protecting the thousands of Iraqis who have staked their lives in backing the U.S.? And would you leave troops in the region to take out any al-Qaeda camps that are developed after we leave?
The people who say there will be a bloodbath are the ones who said it would be a cakewalk, it would be a slam dunk, and that it would be paid for by oil. Why believe them? They've been wrong on everything they've said. So why not ask the people? Why not ask the people who advise not to go into the region and into the war? The war has not gone well one bit. Yes, I would leave completely. Why leave the troops in the region? It was the fact that we had troops in Saudi Arabia was one of the three reasons given for the attack on 9/11. So why leave them in the region? They don't want our troops on the Arabian Peninsula. We have no need for our national security to have troops on the Arabian Peninsula. And going into Iraq and Afghanistan and threatening Iran is the worst thing we can do for our national security. I am less safe. The American people are less safe for this. It's the policy that is wrong. Tactical movements and shifting troops around and taking in 30 more and reducing by 5, totally irrelevant. We need a new foreign policy that said we ought to mind our own business, bring our troops home, defend this country, defend our borders.
So if... So, Congressman Paul, and I'd like you to take 30 seconds to answer this. You're basically saying that we should take our marching orders from al-Qaeda. If they want us off the Arabian Peninsula, we should leave?
No! I'm saying we should take our marching orders from our Constitution. We should not go to war. We should not go to war without a declaration. We should not go to war when it's an aggressive war. This is an aggressive invasion. We've committed the invasion of this war, and it's illegal under international law. That's where I take my marching orders, not from any enemy.
Over this way.
The American people didn't go in. A few people advising this administration, a small number of people called the neoconservatives, hijacked our foreign policy. They're responsible, not the American people. They're not responsible. We shouldn't punish them.
Congressman, we are one nation. We can't be divided. We have to be one nation under God. That means if we make a mistake, we make it as a single country, the United States of America, not the divided States of America.
When we make a mistake, it is the obligation of the people through their representatives to correct the mistake, not to continue the mistake.
And that's what we do on the floor of the Senate?
No, we've dug a hole for ourselves, and we've dug a hole for our party. We're losing elections, and we're going down next year if we don't change it. And it has all to do with foreign policy, and we have to wake up to this fact.
Even if we lose elections, we should not lose our honor, and that is more important than the Republican Party.
We have lost over 5,000 Americans killed in Afghanistan. We've lost over 5,000 Americans over there in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and plus the civilians killed. How many more do you want to lose? How long are you going to be there? How long? What do we have to pay to save face? That's all we're doing is saving face. It's time we came home.
Gentlemen, thank you. Wendell.
Let me try to explain so you can understand this better. Try to visualize how we would react if they did that to us. If a country, say China, came at great distance across the ocean, and they say, we want you to live like us. We want you to have our economic system. We want bases on your land. We want to protect our oil. even if we do that with good intentions, even if the Chinese did that with good intentions, we would all be together and we'd be furious.
Ron, you're reading their propaganda. You're reading their propaganda.
What would you do?
I'd read their writings. I'd read what they write to one another, and that's why when someone like Syed Qutb lays out the philosophy of radical jihadism and says we want to kill.
And what you're saying,
let me complete.
There's always a radical element in almost all religions. They have to have an incentive. We give them that incentive. The question that you aren't willing to ask is, why is it that they attack America? I mean, they don't attack the Canadians. They don't attack the Swiss. If it were merely because they want to go into Europe,
is it such a puzzle? Is it such a mystery as to why they attack America?
It is.
They're not going after Luxembourg.
It is because we've gone. It is because we've gone 6 miles.
We're the strongest nation in the world.
Ron, we have.
Ron, it's simply not true.
The president asks a very important question, and we should all come together, and we shouldn't have that many disagreements because we should be bound down by the Constitution. But the people in this country think we live in an age of relative ethics, is what they kind of have come to the conclusion of. Sure, profess to believe in the Constitution, but why have we gone to war since World War II without a declaration of war? Why do we have a monetary system that is not designed by the Constitution? Why do we have a welfare state running out of control, not designed by the Constitution? You can't pay lip service to the Constitution without obeying it. And we should have peace and prosperity. That should be our goal. We in foreign policy ought to have a golden rule. We ought to treat others as we would want others to treat us, and we don't treat others so fairly. We treat them like we're the bully, that we're the policeman of the world, and we're going to tell them to behave. If they don't listen to us, we bomb them. If they listen to us, we give them more money, and it's bankrupting this country because we don't live up to our principles. The principles are embedded in our Constitution.
Congressman Paul, this comes from Jay Majumdar from Roswell, Georgia, and he wants to know if you agree with Senator McCain's statement that the United States might need to have U.S. troops in Iraq for as long as even 100 years.
I don't even think they should have gone. So keeping them for 100 years, where's the money going to come from? You know, the country's in bankruptcy, and when I listen to this argument, I mean, I find it rather silly because they're arguing technicalities of a policy they both agree with. They agreed to going in, agreed for staying how many years, and these are technicalities. We should be debating foreign policy, whether we should have interventionism or non-interventionism, whether we should be defending this country or whether we should be the policeman of the world, whether we should be, you know, running our empire or not, and how are we going to have guns and butter? You know, the 70s were horrible because we paid for the guns and butters of the 60s. Now we're doing the same thing, and nobody even seems to care. The dollar is crashing, and you're talking about these technicalities about who said what when. I mean, in 1952, we Republicans were elected to stop the war in Korea. 1968, we were elected to stop the war in Vietnam. And tragically, we didn't stop it very fast. 30,000 more men died. So when I talk about these long-term stays, I think, how many men are you willing to let die for this? For something that has nothing to do with our national security. There were no Al-Qaeda there, had nothing to do with 9/11, and there was no threat to our national security. They never committed aggression. It's unconstitutional. It's an undeclared war. And we have these silly arguments going on about who said what when. I think it's time to debate foreign policy and why we don't follow the Constitution and only go to war with a declaration of war. Not supposed to manage the people.
What role do you think the federal government should have in, I mean, does the federal government, in your opinion, have a role in stimulating the economy?
Yes, by lower taxes and less regulations. They could do a whole lot by having sound money where we don't print the money out of thin air. That causes the business cycle. That causes your bubbles. We're always dealing with the symptoms and the disease and never saying, how did this come about? You know, it comes about because we have a Federal Reserve that creates money and credit out of thin air. There's a lot of malinvestment. That's the most important thing to understand about the inflation of the monetary system, is the malinvestment. Then later on, people suffer, and you wipe out a middle class. But it's the evil of it all is the vehicle for financing wars that we shouldn't be in and a welfare state that we shouldn't be doing. So, yes, we have a role to play, but it's a negative role. We want the people to be free. We don't want to manage the people and tell them how to live. And we need a commander-in-chief But the most important thing on it as a commander-in-chief is not moving troops around as much as it is having a wise foreign policy that doesn't get us involved in so many things, and we get trapped and we linger year after year. We've been doing this for so long.
Yep.
And I like President Bush's argument that we have a humble foreign policy when he ran in 2000, and that we not be the policeman of the world.
So now with Pawlenty dropping out, Rick Perry dropping in, and Michelle Bachmann and Ron Paul dominating the Ames straw poll, we got ourselves a race.
We have a top tier. It is Mitt Romney, Rick Perry, and Michelle Bachmann.
We have a new top tier, and it's Perry, Mitt Romney, and Bachmann.
There's now a top tier in this race, at least for now, of Romney, Perry, and Bachmann.
I mean, I think that's fair to say. Really fair to say? You're not forgetting, I don't know, anyone, say an ideologically consistent 12-term congressman who came within less than 200 votes of winning the straw poll? Isn't anyone going to give that gentleman a little love?
There's a top tier now of Bachmann and Perry and Romney, and, you know, we haven't mentioned, and we should.
Thank you.
We haven't mentioned, and we should, Rick Santorum, who did really surprisingly well for the amount of money and resources he had.
Rick Santorum? He didn't get half of what Ron Paul got. He lost to the guy who lost so bad he dropped out of the race. Santorum?
We're looking at Mitt Romney, who continues to be the front runner, but we have Rick Perry as well, and now Michelle Bachmann. Let's not count out John Huntsman, though.
What? John Huntsman? Huntsman got 69 votes. If all of John Huntsman's supporters met at the same Ames, Iowa Quiznos, the fire marshal would say, yeah, that's fine, no problem. There's still some tables open in the back. Huntsman was the only Mormon running in the straw poll, and he came in second amongst Mormons. And by the way, this pretending Ron Paul doesn't exist for some reason has been going on for weeks.
A new Gallup survey showing Rick Perry running second to Mitt Romney, knocking down Iowa favorite Michelle Bachmann to fourth.
Behind who? Fourth behind who? How did Libertarian Ron Paul become the 13th floor in a hotel? Why? What's wrong with... He is Tea Party patient zero. All that small government grassroots business, he planted that grass. These other folks, they're just moral majorities in a tri-cornered hat. Ron Paul's the real deal, and Fox News should love this guy. But watch the disconnect between the debate moderators at Fox's Thursday debate and the debate audience.
Iran does not have an air force that can come here, just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they had nuclear weapons, and we had to go in. I'm sure you supported that war as well. Yeah. Okay. It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.
What's with the smirk and the eye roll? The guy gives it, the crowd goes nuts, and you do one of these. There goes crazy Uncle Ron, babbling about the unsustainability of multiple wars. Boop, boop. He's the one guy in the field, agree with him or don't agree with him, who doesn't go out of his way to regurgitate talking points or change what he believes to fit the audience he's in front of. And you're treating him like if this were Celebrity Apprentice, he'd be this guy. By the way, at the Ames, Iowa straw poll, Busey beat Huntsman 77-69. And even when the media does remember Ron Paul, it's only to reassure themselves how there's no need to remember Ron Paul.
Right now, live, right next to the bus behind us, Ron Paul is speaking. And 7 of the candidates are here today. We have live pictures of Ron Paul, but you know what? We're talking about Sarah Palin, and we're talking about Rick Perry, the two people not in the race yet, Drew.
And guess what, Paul? If you get video of Sarah Palin or get a soundbite from her, bring that back to us. You can hold the Ron Paul stuff.
Right? I mean, that guy, right? We'll be right back.